Intermittent fasting is one of the most powerful strategies for improving your overall metabolic health. It's not just helpful for weight loss, it's actually great for your overall health, with benefits ranging from a reduced risk of heart disease and a reduced risk of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes to significantly improved brain function. But there's a lot of information about intermittent fasting on the internet, and not all of it is scientifically accurate or, quite honestly, even helpful. Fasting is powerful, but there's a distinct difference between smart fasting and extreme fasting. And so we want to give you some clarity about how to fast properly so that you get the metabolic benefit and prevent yourself from long-term negative consequences. So we're going to take a few moments to go over what intermittent fasting is, if you're new to the subject, and get you the tools to be able to implement intermittent fasting into your life starting today. We're also going to talk about our recommended fasting schedules, both for weight loss and for reduced overall chronic disease risk. We're going to talk about what you can eat and what you shouldn't eat during your fasting periods. And we're going to give you some tips on how you can maximize your next intermittent fast. Again, whether this is a new concept to you or whether you've been doing this for a while. Now, one of the things that I'd like to get out of the way before we go too deep into this is understanding that human beings are actually evolutionarily adapted to long duration fasts. So think back to hunter-gatherer times when humans didn't have access to 3 meals a day plus snacks. Our human ancestors were actually not hunter-gatherers, they were gatherer-hunters. And we know this because they spent the majority of their time gathering and a minority of their time hunting other animals. In order to survive for long periods of time with limited food availability, which was quite common, our human ancestors had to fast for extended periods of time, sometimes upwards of 10 days in a row. And we see this in the scientific research. There are studies that demonstrate that when you induce as little as a 10-day fast in humans, you induce a number of significant metabolic improvements. The first study to talk about this is a study titled Influence of a 10-Day Mimic of Our Ancient Lifestyle on Anthropometrics and Parameters of Metabolism and Inflammation. What this study did was put individuals onto a 10-day mimic of a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to determine what would happen to them if they mimicked the behavior of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. In order to do this, they had individuals walk 14 kilometers per day on average, because that's about how much hunter-gatherers used to walk. They also had them carry an 8-kilogram backpack, which is approximately 18 pounds, and that can actually add up very quickly. They then provided them with raw food, because hunter-gatherers generally did not cook their food, and they provided them with fresh water. These individuals also slept outside in sleeping bags, and they were exposed to temperatures as low as 12 degrees and as high as 42 degrees Celsius. What this research study found was that there were 3 features of the metabolic syndrome that significantly improved when living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle for 10 days. And those 3 features include, number 1, body mass, number 2, improved glucose homeostasis, and number 3, circulating lipids. So this is a short-term study to deep dive into what it would look like if you as an individual switched over to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, which, truth be told, is almost akin to backpacking. If you just put on a backpack and went into the woods and hung out for 5 to 10 days at a time, your health would likely significantly improve because your energy expenditure would be quite high, your energy intake would be quite low, you would induce a negative calorie deficit, and as a result of that, a number of metabolic markers will improve. Now, we're going to go into understanding the details about what a calorie deficit is in a little bit, but I want you to understand that this pattern of fasting and feasting, which is cycling between periods of both high energy intake and low calorie intake, creates a collection of biochemical adaptations that naturally selected for individuals who could survive that amidst an uncertain food supply. So this is natural selection at play. The environment places specific restrictions on you, and you as an individual have to adapt to that environmental condition. If you can adapt, then you can reproduce. You are likely to pass on those genes to your offspring. Now, scientists believe that over the course of time, these metabolic adaptations that allowed for regular intermittent fasting became so ingrained into the human species that it's present in our genetic material in modern humans. And for this reason, modern day humans are not only capable of fasting for extended periods of time, they actually derive substantial metabolic benefit when they do. So my point here is that if you didn't just have breakfast, but you still had to hunt, as an example, to get some food, okay? If you had to survive in general, and if you had to endure long periods of time with no food, your body would activate an internal recycling program that would actually optimize the function of your liver and your muscle and your brain and your cardiovascular system. And this internal recycling program is known as autophagy. Autophagy is a name of a biochemical mechanism that is a conserved mechanism that evolved with human beings that is largely responsible for recycling old and damaged proteins inside of cells, old and damaged lipids, and old and damaged carbohydrates. And when this process occurs, the cellular environment tends to become less inflammatory and higher functioning over the course of time. So you can think of autophagy as basically a way that tissues can oxidize fatty acids that have been stored for long periods of time, and to oxidize stored carbohydrates that have been stored for long periods of time that are present inside of your muscle and liver. And by getting rid of those two fuel tanks, and by as well recycling old and dysfunctional proteins, the cellular environment tends to become more optimal, which then induces a number of metabolic adaptations that are positive adaptations inside of each tissue, which then confers improved overall metabolic health. Now, calorie restriction was first discovered back in the 1930s by a researcher named Clive McKay. He and his colleagues at Cornell University were the first to observe that restricting the calorie intake of laboratory rats allowed them to live longer than their ad lib or their well-fed counterparts, who were given access to food approximately 24 hours a day. So you can see on the screen that back in 1939, he published a paper called Retarded Growth, Lifespan, Ultimate Body Size, and Age Changes in the Albino Rat after feeding diets restricted in calories. And him and his team will go down in the literature history because they documented for the first time ever that restricting calorie intake in laboratory rats didn't lower their life expectancy, didn't increase their chronic disease risk, and didn't impair their quality of life. In fact, the exact opposite happened. So you can see on the next graph that animals who were fed an ad lib diet died at a very specific rate. So you're looking at a survival curve, which demonstrates the number of animals that are alive at any given moment of time as a function of time. So at the beginning of the experiment, there are 100% of all animals that are alive. And as time increases on the x-axis, the percentage of animals that are still alive decreases. And what Clive McKay and his colleagues determined was that animals who were calorie restricted ended up living longer. So at any moment in time, when you compare the percent alive versus the ad lib group, those in the calorie restricted group were actually healthier, and a larger number of them were alive. And that's true for both male rats in the top panel as well as female rats in the bottom panel. Now, the next graph shows that other researchers continued to extrapolate upon these findings and then continued to perform experiments where they increased the magnitude of the calorie restriction. So Clive McKay and his colleagues started experimenting with animals who were restricted by between 10 and 20%. And then other researchers continued to improve upon this and restrict animals by as much as 40% or 50% or 60%. And every time they increased the magnitude of calorie restriction, animals continued to live longer. So here again, in red, you see animals that were fed in the ad lib group. These are animals that are provided free access to food that die off according to this very specific pattern. If you restrict animals by 60%, what you end up doing is pushing that survival curve over to the right, which means that these animals ended up living as much as 50% longer simply by eating 60% less food. And finally, in the next graph, you see once again that other researchers are determining the same conserved mechanism occurs not only in rats, but also in mice. You take the ad lib fed animals in green, you restrict them by 25%, you push the survival curve to the right. You restrict them by 55%, again, you push the survival curve to the right. You restrict them by 65%, and again, you push the survival curve to the right. So what this body of research indicates is that calorie restriction is in fact not a stressful metabolic exercise, but in fact an exercise that significantly improves the metabolic health of both mice and rats. Now, this single observation unlocked an explosion of scientific research that began to explain the biological mechanisms that are responsible for reducing the rate of aging, for increasing longevity, for improving memory, for stimulating weight loss, and significantly reducing the risk for many chronic conditions, including heart disease, cancer, and type 2 diabetes. Now, what's interesting about this is that calorie restriction works in almost every single organism studied to date. And I say almost because it's not 100%, but it is a very high percentage. And those organisms include yeast, worms, flies, mice, rats, and most recently, monkeys. Now, calorie restriction has been shown to increase longevity and prolong or delay the onset of many age-related diseases, and is in fact the only known mechanism to increase longevity. Period. End of story. I will say that again. Calorie restriction is the only known mechanism to increase longevity. Period. End of story. You can't exercise more to live a longer life. You can't meditate more to live a longer life. If you turned to me and said, Cyrus, I'm trying to live more days on this planet, I want to extend my longevity, there is only one known conserved biological mechanism that will induce an increase in longevity, and that is calorie restriction. Now, studies have demonstrated that a 20 to 50% reduction in calorie intake has been shown to increase lifespan by up to 50% and prevent or delay the onset of many chronic diseases, including but not limited to obesity, type 2 diabetes, cancer, nephropathy, cardiomyopathy, neurodegeneration, and multiple autoimmune diseases. So if you are living with any form of a chronic disease and you are interested in significantly improving your health, then you may want to consider inducing a calorie-restricted state. So research done by Eric Ravison and Leonie Heilbronn demonstrates that calorie restriction extends lifespan and retards age-related chronic diseases in many species, again, including rats, mice, fish, flies, worms, and yeast. Now, the mechanisms through which the calorie restriction induces its metabolic effects are not fully described, or in other words, are unclear. Calorie restriction reduces the metabolic rate. We know this. And it also significantly reduces oxidative stress. We know this. It improves insulin sensitivity, which should be very interesting to you if you're living with any form of diabetes. And it alters neuroendocrine and sympathetic nervous system function in animals. Those are all good things. So here's the take-home message. Make no mistake about it. Inducing calorie restriction is a powerful way to improve many aspects of your metabolic health, and do it simultaneously. Now, here's the thing. You may think to yourself, all right, fine, calorie restriction sounds like a plan, but I don't want to eat less food, Cyrus. You're telling me that all I have to do is reduce my food intake, but guess what? That's the last thing I want to do. I actually enjoy eating food so much that I want to increase my food intake. So how am I going to actually apply this into my life, especially make it sustainable? Okay. Now, here's the thing I want you to think about. I don't want you to think about all the negative, all the difficulties of accomplishing calorie restriction, because that's where intermittent fasting comes into play. Intermittent fasting is a way to mimic the effects of calorie restriction. But in order to really understand why it works, I want you to think about another concept, and that's called negative calorie balance. Negative calorie balance is the name of the game. Negative calorie balance is a metabolic state in which your energy expenditure exceeds your energy intake. Once again, negative calorie balance is a metabolic state in which your energy expenditure, the amount of energy you are expending, is greater than the amount of energy that you are eating and taking into your mouth. Okay, think of it like a checking account, right? You got your inflows, which is the deposits that go into the account. Then you got your outflows, which are the withdrawals. If you put more into the account than you take out of it, the account is likely to grow. Similarly, in humans, if you eat more calories and you put more energy into the system and you don't take as much out, you are likely to grow, aka become more larger and gain body mass. If you do the exact opposite and instead you put less into the account and you take more out of the account, then you end up with a smaller account. You don't necessarily want that in your bank account, but you do want that in your body. You want to take on less food than you are expending, and that right there is what's called a negative calorie balance. Now, operating in a negative calorie balance for extended periods of time forces your muscles and liver to burn off or offload stored glucose and fatty acids, which in turns makes both of those tissues more responsive to both of those fuels next time they become available. And that's really good news for you. So you might be asking yourself, well, why is this important, Cyrus? All right, 2 reasons. Number 1, first, oxidizing excess stored fat inside of your muscles and inside of your liver is a powerful way to increase their ability to communicate with insulin. If you read the Mastering Diabetes book, you know this. If you're new to this concept, go pick up the Mastering Diabetes book directly from Amazon and read it cover to cover. In that book, you're going to learn the fat-insulin connection, which demonstrates that as your fat intake goes up, your insulin sensitivity goes down. As your fat intake goes up, insulin responsiveness goes down. As your fat intake comes up, insulin action inside of your liver and muscle goes down. So less fat in your diet unlocks the insulin receptor's ability to recognize and communicate with insulin effectively, which is a good thing. And also oxidizing fat by performing an intermittent fast, going into a calorie restricted state, can help get rid or oxidize many of the stored fat molecules that are present inside of your liver and muscle cells, which then enables insulin signaling to increase. Okay. In addition to that, negative calorie balance also oxidizes glucose. And glucose is stored as a molecule known as glycogen. So you can see on your screen right here, glycogen is the stored form of glucose that is present inside of your liver and inside of your muscle. You can think of glycogen as a storage tank, and it's a storage tank of carbohydrate that is a reservoir of energy. So when you go and perform exercise, that is one of the fuel tanks that is dipped into for readily available fuel that you can oxidize and turn into ATP immediately so that you can perform contractions and elongations inside of your muscle tissue. Okay. Now, as the glycogen storage tank begins to decrease when you are in a calorie restricted state, muscle and liver cells activate a series of intracellular mechanisms that make it easier to import glucose the next time you eat it. So in effect, negative calorie balance activates a few collection of master enzymes in your muscle and liver cells that create this state of cellular hunger. And the next time you eat food, that enables those cells to be able to import those fuels easier, and they stay out of your blood and they get inside of tissues exactly where they belong. Now, I understand this may seem illogical, but scientists have uncovered that reducing food intake for extended periods of time allows blood vessels everywhere in your body to relax as well, and that reduces your blood pressure. So you see benefits inside of your liver, benefits inside of your muscle, and significant cardiovascular benefits as well. Now, studies have also shown that calorie restriction improves the function of endothelial cells, which is the single cell layer lining inside of blood vessels. And calorie restriction improves their ability to manufacture a very powerful gas known as nitric oxide. And this is a gas that allows blood vessels to dilate. So calorie restriction, again, you can think of it as this is incredibly powerful form of medicine, if you will, that induces a number of positive metabolic effects in multiple tissues. They happen simultaneously. And as a result, your risk for many chronic diseases decreases as tissue health increases simultaneously. Hey, I'm Cyrus Khambatta, co-creator of the Mastering Diabetes Method, which has helped thousands of people reverse insulin resistance and take control of their lives no matter what type of diabetes they're living with. Do you want to know all of our tips, tricks, and secrets? They're right here in our New York Times best-selling book, Mastering Diabetes, which you can find at masteringdiabetes.org/book. If you're ready to master diabetes, pick up a copy today. You won't be disappointed. Now, in addition to increased nitric oxide synthesis, studies also demonstrate that calorie restriction substantially reduces your LDL cholesterol, your triglyceride level, and directly improves the function of your heart tissue, and can be as effective as exercise. So some of the best exercise physiologists on the planet at Washington University, including John Halsey and Luigi Fontana, have demonstrated this in the research. They conducted a 1-year randomized control trial in middle-aged, lean, and overweight men and women to evaluate the effect of body fat reduction, either by a 20% increase in energy expenditure via exercise or by a 20% decrease in energy intake from calorie restriction. So the question they were trying to answer is, if you're trying to lose fat, because losing fat mass is known to improve metabolic health, what's a more effective way to do it? Do you increase your exercise or do you decrease your food intake? What they found was actually quite fascinating. They hypothesized that exercise would be more effective. But what they actually found was that their 12-month negative calorie balance experiment demonstrated that the calorie restriction group and the exercise groups both improved simultaneously, and both of them improved to approximately the same magnitude. Calorie restriction tended to be slightly more effective, but overall, 20% increase in exercising and a 20% decrease in calorie intake resulted in a significant improvement in many coronary heart disease risk factors. Now, you may not think that that's actually quite powerful, but the truth is that if you don't like exercising, or if you struggle with exercise, or if you are talking yourself out of performing exercise on a daily basis because you just never found a way to integrate it into your lifestyle, then here's the thing. If instead of exercising, which I am a strong advocate for, if instead of exercising, you simply reduced your calorie intake by approximately 20%, that right there would induce a number of similar metabolic benefits. Now, back when I was doing my PhD, research from my laboratory at UC Berkeley also showed that negative calorie balance can reduce what's called the global cell proliferation rate. And the global cell proliferation rate refers to the speed at which cells replicate. And when you can induce a reduction in the replication rate of cells, that means that the tissue itself turns over slower, which means that the rate of tumor incidences also increases slower. So you can see it in this study that we published back in April of 2011. We determined that inducing calorie restriction in animals shown in the white bars on the right-hand side of each of these bar graphs resulted in a reduced turnover rate in keratinocytes, which are cells in your skin, as well as hepatocytes, which are cells in your liver, as well as MEC, which are mammary epithelial cells, shown on the bottom left, as well as splenic T cells shown on the right. So we chose 4 different tissues and demonstrated that calorie restriction, or inducing a negative calorie balance, is effective at lowering the global cell proliferation rate in all 4 of those tissues. And if we went on to study more tissues, we would likely find a very similar effect, which is that the rate at which cells are replicating goes down, which means the rate of tumor incidence goes down, which means the rate of cancer development goes down. And who doesn't want that? Now, since being overweight dramatically increases your risk for the development of many cancers by increasing the global cell proliferation rate, weight loss that naturally occurs from being in negative calorie balance is one of the most powerful things that you can possibly do to reduce your chronic disease risk, especially when it comes to type 2 diabetes and cancer. So I just want you to understand that negative calorie balance is the gold standard. The question is, how can you induce negative calorie balance? Do I have to be hungry all the time, or can I perform it intermittently and get a very similar effect? Now, when it comes to intermittent fasting, again, intermittent fasting is a way to mimic the effects of calorie restriction by inducing negative calorie balance. People ask us all the time, they say, whoa, should I try intermittent fasting? Is it good for me? Is it not good for me? You know, how do I know whether or not I'm a candidate for intermittent fasting? Now, the risks of intermittent fasting are extremely low, and I'm going to go into detail about what intermittent fasting actually is and how you can perform it in a couple minutes here. But just to get this out of the way, okay? Intermittent fasting does apply to the majority of all humans, but here's who it does not apply to. Number one, young children, not smart to induce calorie restriction because they require calories in order to grow. Number two, pregnant women, not smart. Number three, breastfeeding mothers, not smart. Okay. People who should be cautious about intermittent fasting include people with type 1 diabetes, myself. Okay. We're going to show you how you can perform an intermittent fast upwards of 24 hours, but anything beyond 24 hours is definitely not safe. People who have eating disorders. If you have an eating disorder or a history of eating disorders, then I do not recommend intermittent fasting because it can be very difficult psychologically and emotionally. And if you are an athlete trying to gain muscle mass or in advance of a competition, or you're trying to grow your muscle mass and change your body composition, then I strongly would not recommend intermittent fasting. And finally, people who are underweight. Okay, if you're underweight and you are trying to gain weight, then intermittent fasting is not going to lead you in the right direction. Now, if you have a medical condition, people always ask us, well, what about type 2 diabetes? What about chronic kidney disease? What about fatty liver disease? Should I perform intermittent fasting? And the answer is, I'm not your doctor. I cannot tell you exactly which diseases are safe to intermittent fast with, but here's what I will tell you. Talk to your doctor about it. Ask your doctor. Most doctors are actually quite knowledgeable about intermittent fasting. And to give you a sort of generalized statement here, I would say most humans, the answer is yes. But if you have a very specific question about your particular metabolic state, then please go talk with your doctor and get help from a medical professional. Okay. Here's what I want you to not do. I don't want you to overthink this. I don't want you to scare yourself into sitting on the sidelines. I want you to just try this out, and I want you to make small changes until it feels comfortable. Okay. The overwhelming majority of all people should intermittent fast because, again, it induces a number of positive metabolic consequences. Okay. If you're trying to lose weight, I highly recommend inducing negative calorie balance through intermittent fasting. If you're trying to improve your insulin sensitivity, which in my professional opinion should be the majority of all humans, the answer is yes, perform intermittent fasting. Okay. This is a very valuable technique that can significantly improve your insulin sensitivity independent of exercise, independent of a low-fat, plant-based, whole food diet. And now we can get into detail about how you can specifically do this in your world. Okay. The question is this a sprint? Is this a marathon? Do I have to commit to this for the rest of my life? And the answer is, I want you to just start. That's all I want you to do. I don't want you to get too deep into what's going to happen 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and can I turn this into a permanent habit change? Don't think about that. Just think about the next couple of days. The first thing that you can do is called a once per week intermittent fast. It's a 24-hour fast that is performed only 1 day per week. So here's how you can do this. You just choose 1 day of the week where you are likely to not be quite active. Okay, so you choose a rest day if you are an active exerciser. And during that day, you basically are going to drink water for breakfast, drink water for lunch, and start and stop your fast at dinner time. So the easiest way to think about this is if you chose Wednesday as your fasting day, what I would do is go backwards to Tuesday evening. I would eat dinner. I would finish my dinner at, let's say, 7 o'clock p.m. I would stop eating dinner at 7 o'clock p.m. and I would start my stopwatch. From that moment onwards, my goal is to try and not eat food for approximately 24 hours. How am I going to do that? Well, from the time dinner is done until the time I go to bed, I'll just drink some water. When I hit the pillow, hopefully at like 9 o'clock p.m., 10 o'clock p.m., somewhere around there, I'll have 2 to 3 hours of a post-digestive state already passed. And that's a good thing because most of the material inside of my digestive system will have cleared. And as a result of that, my digestive system will not be running an active metabolic process, which will enable me to sleep better. I will then go to sleep at, call it 10 o'clock p.m. I'll sleep from 10 o'clock p.m. until 6 o'clock a.m. the next morning. When I wake up, I am already 11 hours into my fast because your sleeping window counts. So I'm pretty much halfway done if you think about it that way. All I have to do is not eat food for breakfast and not eat food for lunch. Well, how am I going to do that? It's very simple. For breakfast, instead of eating food, what I would do is drink 2 to 3 glasses of water. Now, water has this effect where when you consume large quantities of it, it actually can slightly distend the stretch receptors inside of your stomach and inside of your large intestine. It can kind of temporarily mimic the idea that you're eating food. And as a result of that, it sends a neurological signal up to your brain that says, okay, slow down. I'm not as hungry anymore. Okay. I'm not going to lie. It's going to be a little bit difficult the first time you do it, maybe the second time, maybe the third time, but it'll eventually get to a point where your brain no longer sends a signal to your digestive system that says it's time for food, because you'll develop a pattern where you're not eating breakfast, and then that will fade away. So you basically just consume water and not worry about eating food during your breakfast time. Now, you get to lunch. At lunchtime, you want to do the same thing. Distract yourself. Go somewhere else. Don't show up to a cafe. Don't go to a friend's house for food when everybody else is eating. Distract yourself and take yourself away from a food environment. And when you do that, then you can pass the lunch hour and you can continue to drink water or drink a decaffeinated beverage until you get to dinner time. Now, the goal is to get to approximately 24 hours. If you stop your fast at 5 o'clock p.m. or 6 o'clock p.m. instead of 7 o'clock p.m., it's not a big deal. Just get to a point where you're fasting for approximately 24 hours. And when you do that, you've induced a significant metabolic benefit to multiple tissues, like we've already talked about. Now you can take it to the next level and perform the next type of fast. And this is called the twice per week 24-hour intermittent fast. Here, you're going to choose 2 days of the week instead of just one. So here I would do Monday and Thursday because they're separated by a couple of days where I can continue to eat food. I'm going to do the same thing and basically skip eating food for 24 hours on Monday. I'm going to eat my dinner on Sunday night, and I'm going to eat my dinner on Monday. And then I'm going to repeat that process on Thursday. And when I do it that way, I now have 2 periods of 24-hour intermittent fasting under my belt, which is going to induce a larger negative calorie balance. The third option is for people who have performed intermittent fasting for a significant period of time and are more comfortable with it. This is the most effective type of fast that I've ever seen. It's called the 16-8 intermittent fast. And this is actually, funny enough, easier than a 24-hour intermittent fast, and it's also more effective. So here's how you do it. You choose one meal of the day that you're not going to eat. Breakfast is usually the easiest meal to not eat. So again, if we go backwards and start on the Sunday evening, I want you to eat dinner on Sunday evening. I want you to start your fast as soon as dinner is over. I want you to fast all the way through breakfast the next morning, wake up, drink some water, continue moving along through your day, and then basically start eating food at approximately 12 o'clock the next day. If you do it that way, you effectively skip one meal, which is breakfast, and then you are allowed to eat your lunch, you are allowed to eat a snack, you are allowed to eat a dinner, and then you do it over again. The trick with a 16-8 fast, and the reason why it is so effective, is because you do it every day. The original 24-hour fast that I spoke about, the once per week and the twice per week, they're only done once or twice per week. The 16-8 fast is performed every single day. And the accumulated negative calorie balance that you accumulate today and tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day is what creates such a powerful metabolic effect over the course of time. At first, it's going to suck, and then it's going to feel automatic. And at that point, you're not going to have to think about it. You're just not even going to be hungry at breakfast. And that's easy for you. You continue doing this process every single day, and eventually you get to the point where you are a professional intermittent faster. Now, let's get into our tips and tricks for having a good experience or a great experience in your next intermittent fast. Okay. Now, again, I want to stress the fact that your sleep time counts. When you are asleep, you are not eating food. You can absolutely count that towards your overall duration of intermittent fasting. And that's a good thing because that means you don't have to count only your waking hours. Okay. You want to get into a fasted state of extended duration. That is where the metabolic magic happens. And that's when autophagy activates, which again is that cellular recycling program that we talked about earlier. Okay. Now, research shows that as little as 100 calories can put you back into a fed state. So the goal is to try and keep your total calorie intake below 100 calories for the entire duration of your fast. During your fast, I recommend drinking a lot of water. I also say it's okay to drink coffee. If you want to drink either caffeinated or decaffeinated coffee, go for it. I'm not going to put that in as an obstacle in your way. You can certainly drink tea, both caffeine rich and caffeine free. You can drink green juices. You can drink apple cider vinegar with water. And you can even snack on some non-starchy vegetables like cauliflower and broccoli and cucumbers and tomatoes because they're very low in their calorie intake and they are likely to not disrupt the fasting state. Now, when it comes to tea, I'm going to be perfectly honest here. We created a tea made of Indian gooseberries. It's called Amla green tea. If you haven't heard of it yet, I highly recommend taking a look at it. It incorporates the Indian gooseberry, which is the most powerful antioxidant-rich food ever discovered by human beings. It has documented research-based improvements in its total antioxidant power. Because it's such a powerful berry, it can induce 3 different types of metabolic improvements. Number 1, it's the most powerful cholesterol reducing food ever discovered by humans. Number 2, it's an extremely powerful blood glucose lowering food. And number 3, it's an extremely powerful blood pressure lowering food. So if you want lower cholesterol and or lower blood glucose and or lower blood pressure, then eating Indian gooseberries is likely to give you some metabolic benefit. So what we did is we turned the umla berry, which is an otherwise very unpleasurable experience, into something that's actually tasty. So you can see here on your screen, the green bottle is the original flavor. And this is a combination of Indian gooseberries plus green tea. This one tends to have about 1/4 as much caffeine as a cup of coffee. So it's got a very small caffeine dose. And if you're very sensitive to caffeine, then you can just get the decaffeinated version of this green bottle. The next bottle that we created, or the next flavor, is the hibiscus flavor, as you can see here in red. This bottle is our most popular product. And this contains hibiscus, which is another antioxidant, powerful, rich food, plus Indian gooseberries, plus cinnamon, plus mint, plus ginger. And the combination of all these tastes fantastic. And people have been raving about just how powerful it is and how great it tastes. The third flavor, which we created, is the purple bottle. And the purple bottle is elderberries. We created this to be a very powerful immune boosting version of the umla green tea product line. And this contains Indian gooseberries plus elderberries plus mint plus ginger plus cinnamon. The combination of those ingredients tastes actually very good. This is my favorite flavor and has a very powerful, not only cardiovascular and diabetes benefits, but it also can significantly improve your immune system. And finally, we created pumpkin spice. Now, who doesn't love pumpkin spice? Okay, it's the brown bottle. And this was an instant hit as soon as we released it at the end of last year. If you like pumpkin spice, if you're a pumpkin spice latte fan and you just like the pumpkin flavor, pick up one of these bottles, because this also contains the Indian gooseberry, has powerful metabolic effects, and has that flavor of Thanksgiving / Halloween / Christmas that we all love. Okay. Now, also, since you're a fan of Mastering Diabetes, I'm going to extend you a 20% discount. All you got to do is use the code Mastering Diabetes 20 at checkout. So go ahead and use that code if you're picking up a bottle of umla green or multiple bottles. Get this stuff into your life. And the reason I'm talking about it in the first place, now that I'm done with my advertisement, is because umla green is a very powerful beverage that you can drink during a fast. The whole purpose of drinking water while you are fasting or staying hydrated is because it's extremely important during a fast. And if you're going to choose some beverage, it might as well be either pure water or have an antioxidant rich benefit, because adding antioxidants during a fasted state is another way of performing metabolic housekeeping that can improve the functionality of tissues all throughout your body. Okay. Now, if you're super hungry and you want to just tough it out, is that the right way to go about it? Because a lot of people complain to us, or they suggest to us, they're like, listen, I tried to do this intermittent fasting thing, but my Lord, was it hard. I got to the 16-hour marker and I wanted to eat everything in sight. I got to the 24-hour marker and I could barely stay conscious, right? Now, the truth is that oftentimes people exaggerate, but the idea is if you get super hungry, here's what you can do. Number 1, pause. Just get a control of your emotions. I understand that being hungry can also, make people hangry and, can get worked up emotionally. But if you just take a pause, take a deep breath, go outside, distract yourself, get away from food. That's my primary trick. Don't go to your kitchen. Don't go to a cafe. Don't go watch somebody else eat a piece of pizza. Go outside where the thought of food is not likely to happen. And when you do it that way, it significantly reduces your emotional overwhelm. And that right there can dramatically improve your overall fasting experience. Now, another question that people ask us all the time is they say, all right, fine, I can do this intermittent fasting thing. That sounds like a plan. But what about when I eat food? What am I allowed to eat? What should I be eating? And surprise, surprise, I'm going to tell you that my recommendation is to eat a low-fat, plant-based, whole food diet. I guess you didn't know I was going to say that, right? Technically speaking, you can eat whatever you wanted, right? Because you induce a negative calorie balance, and that is a good positive metabolic state. But then what you likely don't want to do is go into the fed state where you're actually inducing inflammation because of the quality of nutrients that are coming into your mouth, or because of the quantity, right? So a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet is going to help with weight loss, help continue to keep your immune system strong, help reduce your risk for heart disease, and help reduce your risk for insulin resistance and diabetes, okay? But if you eat a diet that contains things like high meat, high dairy, and other processed foods or ultra processed foods, then what you do during your fed states is you increase your chronic disease risk, and then you're using intermittent fasting as a band-aid to try and reduce your chronic disease risk. So you're basically yo-yoing between this is good for me, this is not good for me, this is good for me, this is not good for me, and it ends up putting you in a tough position down the road, okay? The reason you're fasting in the first place is to improve your metabolic health. So eating a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet aligns with the very reason that you are performing intermittent fasting in the first place. So if you look on your screen, you'll see that we categorize foods into green light, yellow light, and red light, okay? In the green light category, these are foods that you can eat ad lib as much as you want. You do not have to count calories. You do not have to count portion control. You do not have to count servings, okay? We say this because in the overwhelming majority of people, when they increase their fiber intake from fiber-rich foods, from fruits, starchy vegetables, beans, lentils, peas, intact whole grains, leafy greens, non-starchy vegetables, herbs, spices, and mushrooms, the more of that material they eat, the more fiber they put into their digestive system, the more full they become. I know it's counterintuitive. You might be thinking to yourself, whatever. When I eat fruit, I'm hungry 10 minutes later. The answer is, I'm not asking you to just sit there and eat fruit. I'm asking you to eat a fiber-rich collection of foods. And when you do it that way, you're eating a lot of fiber plus water, which is called bulk. And that is the single most powerful satiation signal that researchers have ever discovered. We wrote about it in our book, Mastering Diabetes. You can read about it in the book, Mastering Diabetes. There's an entire section on bulk. And all of that research is derived from a woman named Dr. Barbara Rolls, who has created an entire system called volumetrics, which is mind-bogglingly powerful. Here's my point. The green light collection of foods is real good for you. Can we maybe blow that up on the screen? There we go. I like it. Okay, let's get that nice and big. The yellow light category includes foods that you can certainly eat, but just have them in small quantities because they tend to be a little bit more processed or a little bit more fat rich. Number 1, nuts. Number 2, seeds. Number 3, avocados, then coconuts, olives, soy, pastas, and breads. Okay. Again, a little bit is okay. A lot of it can turn into a little bit of a challenging metabolic situation. Finally, in the red light category, these are all the foods that have documented inflammatory effects. Okay. And I know a lot of people are going to say, Cyrus, what are your sources? Cite your sources for every single one of these. I've done that before, and I'm not going to do it right here. But the point is that the more dairy products you eat, the more eggs, the more red meat, the more white meat, the more fish, the more shellfish, the more oil you consume, the more refined sugars, and the more pastries and breads you put into your mouth, the higher your risk for many chronic diseases. Okay. So that's why we put those in the red light category, because those have documented either carcinogenic effects or documented chronic disease inducing effects. And when you reduce your intake of those and move from the red light category over to the yellow light and then the green light category, you can just watch as your health dramatically improves in a very short period of time. Hey, I'm Cyrus Khambatta, co-founder of Mastering Diabetes and the New York Times bestselling co-author of Mastering Diabetes. Now, the secret to weight loss and reversing conditions like insulin resistance and heart disease is in your diet. I'm sure you know that by now. But do you know exactly what to eat in order to make that happen? Now, we make it simple with a delicious and simple meal plan that contains 21 meals per week that's guaranteed to help you lose weight and improve your health from the ground up. If you want those secrets, visit masteringdiabetes.org/feedme and begin eating the tastiest food you've eaten in years and absolutely love your newfound health. masteringdiabetes.org/feedme. Get started today. All right, here's the next question we get from people. They say, all right, fine. I get you. I should be eating a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet when I'm eating. I should be calorie restricting approximately 16 hours a day for best results. But here's the thing I'm concerned about. If I fast, is that going to make me slower? Because I like to exercise, and I'm concerned that if I'm exercising and I'm fasting simultaneously, that fasting is going to get in the way of my exercise regimen, and it's not going to enable me to get good physical performance. Okay. So most people tend to think that if they stop eating large quantities of protein in particular, that they're going to get weaker, and all of a sudden they're going to lose muscle mass, and then they're going to shrivel away and die. Okay. Now, I'm joking when I say that, but I'm also not joking because you see this all over the place, and most of this is just pure bro science. Okay. Now, most people believe that you have to eat thousands and thousands and thousands of calories a day. The protein is the most important macronutrient. But the truth is that the importance of protein is highly exaggerated. And we did an entire piece and an entire podcast episode, an entire YouTube video, an entire collection of other short videos about the effect of eating too much protein and how it actually can induce what's called late onset postprandial hyperglycemia. What the heck is that? It is the induction of insulin resistance about 3 to 5 hours after you finish eating a meal. Okay. If you want to watch that video and listen to that podcast, then by all means, I highly recommend doing it. Whatever platform you on, you can either see it in the notes or you can see it pop up on the screen. But my point here is go listen to that episode about protein, because we talk a lot about how protein is not created equal. Stuff that comes from plants is different than stuff that comes from animals. And the consumption of any more than approximately 30 grams of protein from one meal can induce high blood glucose and high insulin concentrations in the 5 to 18 hours following a meal, which can put you in the wrong direction and create a negative metabolic state. That's not what we're looking for. Okay. Now, another question that people worry about is that they won't be able to exercise if they are performing calorie restriction. Okay. And the truth is that when you first begin intermittent fasting and or calorie restriction, it can be a little hard because all of a sudden you're going from being well fed all day long every day to inducing a state of negative calorie balance. And, you might get a little tired and you might feel like when you're in the gym, you don't have as much exercise. I'll be the first person to tell you that. I've done that before a lot of times. And that is a true statement. But here's the thing. After about 3 or 4 days, it fades away because, again, the neurological signal that your brain sends to your digestive system that says eat food, eat food, eat food, eat food, eat food, that tends to fade away. And as a result of that, you're less hungry. And as a result of that, you don't worry about food as much. And then the emotional feeling of not being able to perform in the gym disappears. Okay. Now, I've been an avid athlete for, 39 years of my life. And I can tell you that when intermittent fasting, it is absolutely possible to exercise, and I highly recommend doing it. But here's the thing. If you're going to perform intermittent fasting, the simplest way to do it is to eat food and exercise in approximately the same window. So if you're performing a 16-8 fast as an example, and you have an 8-hour eating window, then put your exercise inside of that eating window. So that means that if you do happen to have low blood glucose or you wanted to get a little bit of food before or after your exercise regimen, you're allowed to because it's in your eating window. But if you tried to exercise in your fasting state, you're welcome to do that as well. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult because if you want to eat food, then there's none available for you. Okay? It's just that simple. Now, if you're doing high intensity exercise, I highly recommend exercise during your eating window. That is the most important thing that you can do. And the reason is because high intensity interval training can certainly be very physically demanding on you. And if you can do that exercise during your feeding window, you're going to put yourself at an advantage. Now, the last thing I'll talk about exercise is that people say that it's going to help me, it's going to cause me to lose muscle mass and or I'm not going to be able to gain weight. And the answer is gaining weight might be challenging. I'll be the first person to tell you that. But the best part is that if you are losing weight as a result of intermittent fasting, exercising is really good for you because normally when you lose weight, let's say you lose weight and you're not exercising at all. When you lose weight without any exercise, you lose approximately, for every pound that you lose approximately 2/3 of that as fat mass and approximately 1/3 of that as lean body mass, as muscle tissue. Okay. So it's impossible to avoid. When you lose weight, you will lose muscle mass, period, end of story. But when you perform exercise inside of your lifestyle and you are losing weight simultaneously, the exercise will preserve muscle mass loss. That's the beauty of it. So rather than it being 2/3 fat, 1/3 muscle, it can go upwards of maybe 80% or 90% fat and then only 10 to 20% muscle. So you can think of exercise as a way of preserving your existing muscle mass. And that's something that you likely are going to want if you're an avid exerciser. All right, that's a lot of information. I get it. Let's recap to make sure that we are all on the same page. Okay. I'm going to give you approximately 11 take home messages. I know that's a lot. We're going to walk through them one by one by one. Number one, if you're interested in starting intermittent fasting, I highly recommend it, but please start slowly. If you're new to intermittent fasting, just start with a shorter duration of fasting and then gradually increase it over time. You can start with as little as 12 hours and then go to 14 and then to 16, and then you can just stop when you get to 16. There is no rush. Work this into your lifestyle and do it in a way where it's sustainable. And if it takes you a week or 2 weeks or a month to get there, it's totally fine. Nobody is going to hold you accountable for that. Number two, stay hydrated at all times. Drink plenty of water throughout the day when you're performing intermittent fasting, especially during your fasting period. When you get into a mindset of not wanting to eat any food, you can also sometimes forget to drink water, and that can be disastrous down the road, especially if you're living with any form of diabetes, because dehydration can increase your blood glucose. So stay hydrated. It's going to help the autophagy process. It's going to help keep your blood glucose low. It's going to help keep your blood pressure low, and you're going to be doing yourself a huge favor. Number three, plan your meals. Plan your meals ahead of time and focus on eating nutrient-dense foods from a low-fat, plant-based, whole food diet when you are in your eating window. It's very simple to do. Planning your meals actually becomes easier because there's less meals to plan. So if you can think forward and make sure that you know exactly what you're going to eat and when you're going to eat it, it can just make the process a little bit more systematic. Number four, be consistent. Be very consistent and stick to a consistent fasting schedule. And this is going to help your brain adapt to an intermittent fasting regimen. It's going to help your digestive system adapt to the intermittent fasting regimen. And it's most importantly going to help your emotions adapt to an intermittent fasting regimen. The thing that derails people most of the time is purely their emotions. So if you can get to a point where you are doing this in a consistent manner, your brain will learn it, your body will learn it, and it'll get to a point where it just feels automatic. That's the point. Number five, listen to your body. If you feel unwell, or if you feel extremely hungry, or if you feel lightheaded, or you have low blood pressure, or you are going hypoglycemic, then it is okay to break your fast early, okay? Please don't be irresponsible, and please don't feel like you have to power through something when there could be alarm bells going off in your head. Please be safe when doing this at all times. Number six, stay busy. Okay. Keep yourself occupied during your fasting period, especially at the beginning of the fasting process, because it can help distract you from hunger and cravings that can derail you. Okay. I cannot emphasize this enough. If you are sitting in an area where other people are eating food, where you can smell food being prepared, or you are visibly able to look at other people consuming food, it's going to make your life harder. So take yourself out of that environment and stack the cards in your favor. Number seven, try not to overeat during your eating windows. Okay. While intermittent fasting allows you to be able to eat large meals during your eating window, it's still important to be very mindful of how much food you are consuming. And I don't want you to think that you have to overeat simply because you're not going to be eating for an extended duration of time. Okay. Eat sensibly, eat to about 80% fullness, and you should be just fine. Number eight, eat a nutrient-dense diet. Eat a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet, because that's what I recommend. That's what we recommend at Mastering Diabetes, and that's what the research has demonstrated to be one of the most powerful things that you can do for your overall health. It is the most nutrient-dense diet ever discovered by human beings. It has a higher concentration of antioxidants and phytochemicals than any other diet known to man. So stack the cards in your favor once again and eat that during your feeding windows. Number nine, stay active. Incorporate regular physical activity into your routine to help maximize the benefits of intermittent fasting. Again, it will help preserve your muscle mass if you are an active individual during a weight loss process. Number 10, get enough sleep. Aim for 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night to help support your overall well-being and to help you stay asleep while you are hungry. It's just that simple. If you're awake for too many hours, then you might talk yourself out of the fasting state. And if you are asleep, you don't even know that you're hungry, and it can keep you in the game for a longer period of time. And finally, number 11, consider working with a healthcare professional if you have any particular healthcare concerns that you need to address. If you have any underlying medical conditions or concerns, Please talk with your doctor. Please work with a healthcare professional. Please reach out to the team at Love Life Telehealth, that was formerly known as plant-based telehealth, to get a telehealth physician to help you determine whether intermittent fasting is right for you, and they will help you perform intermittent fasting so that you can get maximum benefits from it. I hope this has been a insightful and helpful deep dive into understanding insulin resistance and intermittent fasting, and how you can use intermittent fasting as a tool to induce negative calorie balance to maximize your overall health. There's a lot to learn in this world of intermittent fasting, and my goal is to try and provide you with value at all times. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our team, leave a comment on whatever platform you're on, and we will get back to you and help you dramatically improve your life as quickly as possible. Talk with you real soon. Hi, I'm Cyrus Khambatta, co-founder of Mastering Diabetes and the New York Times best-selling author of Mastering Diabetes. Now, the science behind diabetes can get very complicated very quickly, but fortunately, your solution doesn't have to be. If you'd like to learn the simple, proven, and guaranteed method to take your life back from diabetes, you can go to masteringdiabetes.org/start to get guidance, coaching, and more information today. It's time to sit in the driver's seat of your diabetes health and make this the last coaching program you ever need. Are you ready? If you are, visit masteringdiabetes.org/start to get started in the same coaching program that's helped over 10,000 people around the world. See you inside.